What if I told you Babylon AD lost everything in a single meeting? One song, wrong room, career gone. Arista's execs wanted a radio puppet. The band gave them a middle finger and surround sound. Here's how that deal went down.
Like, subscribe, thank you.
Nobody starts a story with the glory days. They start in the pit. Babylon AD was a street fight before it was a band. By the time the name started echoing through the Bay Area's back rooms, half the city had already lost a night's sleep or a patch of dignity somewhere on their own turf. Oakland, late 80s, guitar cases banging on car trunks, cold fog, and no guarantees. So when the band finally planted their flag in 1987, the only certainty was this: every set felt like the last one before the dream ended or blew up. This was not a music scene that gave out second chances. Clubs were freaking brutal, and competition even worse. Babylon AD clawed their way from local dives to a shot at the big time, never knowing how many bodies would be left at the side of the road. And what came next was anything but safe. No press agent, no label feeding them advances, just a handful of guys trying to make noise in clubs that reeked of stale beer, where one bad set meant that you played your next gig 3 blocks further from the good part of town. The city chewed up bands for fun, but Babylon AD kept going, scraping together demos, hustling for opening slots, quietly building something bigger than anyone outside the Bay Area even realized. But the real storm didn't hit until after the name change. But by then, these guys had already turned the Bay Area upside down as the Persuaders. Before any record exec knew their names, it was Derek Davis and his crew, John Matthews, Ron Freshy, Jimmy Pacheco, Rob Reed, pulling crowds nobody thought possible for a bunch of kids from rival high school bands. They started out fighting each other for stage time at school assemblies and dive bars, but by the time the Persuaders found their groove, they turned that old competition into a dangerous kind of chemistry. Packed houses in San Francisco, shoulder-to-shoulder crowds in LA, enough sweat to soak a stack of gig flyers. Every show was another round. Omni, Niles Station, Keystone, Palo Alto, then up to Sacramento, over to LA at the Country Club and the Roxy. Never dialing it in, never going through the motions. The songs just hit hard, the hooks stuck, and the set list got tighter every single night. The local scene just could not ignore it anymore. By the tail end of 1988, with the crowds growing and the stakes getting higher, the band looked south and set their sights on Hollywood. The Bay Area days had been wild, but LA was about to change everything, one way or another. But nobody planned on a name change right before liftoff. But just as the group were gearing up to go national, some Chicago group, who we'd all come to forget or not even know about, came crawling out of the woodwork, waving the Persuaders' name like a restraining order. 5 years of prior use, enough legal threat to turn a promising hard rock act into a footnote if they didn't fold. So they went with Babylon. With the debut artwork already on deck, the band tacked on AD, a patch job, not a rebrand, but enough to dodge a lawsuit and keep things moving. And that's how the Persuaders died and the Babylon AD got shoved into the world right as the ink dried on a deal with Arista Records. And Arista was no rock haven. This was a label known for pushing Whitney Houston, Kenny G, not long-haired Oakland kids with Marshall stacks. Pop was their business. And Babylon AD was the only thing on the roster loud enough to rattle the furniture. Still, Arista's rock department stepped up. They poured money into radio promo and didn't cheap out on music videos. And suddenly, the band was no longer hustling club gigs. They were standing at the edge, staring down the mainstream, wondering if Arista's big machine could actually make room for 5 outliers from the Bay. The stage was set, but the next move would come with some strings attached. And before anybody could guess whether the label's gamble would pay off, Babylon AD found themselves deep in LA, burning through studio time like lottery winners. Their self-titled debut, Babylon AD, rolled out in the fall of '89. Simon Hanhart sat in the producer's chair, calling the shots while the band bounced between some of the most expensive studios on either coast. Ocean Way, Cherokee, Summer Recorders. All the big names in LA, the budget didn't even stop there. Tracking sessions stretched across the TMF studios in New York City, Rumbo Recorders in Canoga Park, which is also where Guns N' Roses made some really cool demos. It was the kind of production schedule built for chart toppers, but not rookies from Oakland. But the record label wanted a record that could hang with the pop giants on their roster. Money was flowing, clock was ticking, and the pressure just kept ratcheting up behind every single studio door. And there's always this moment where a band either breaks or gets forgotten. And for Babylon AD, it started the second those first singles hit the airwaves. Bang Go the Bells, Hammer Swings Down, The Kid Goes Wild, These tracks turned the debut album from just another release into a real threat on the rock circuit. Bang Go the Bells is like this serious anthem, and the guitar tone was just incredible. You could hear the pure tube of those amps left and right. Headphone candy all the way. And it wasn't just filler. Bang Go the Bells bulldozed its way into heavy rotation, earning a spot as one of the decade's pure adrenaline-shot rock anthems. Hammer Swings Down, it just doubled down. Another blast of high voltage, fist in the air 80s metal that didn't just fill the album, it helped define it. And the band was not into chasing trends. Those songs started cracking open doors, turning club regulars into believers, and shifting Babylon AD from local heroes to rising contenders more on a national scale. But there was something brewing behind all that momentum, a crack that could split just as wide as it opened. The lead singer, Derek Davis, would later admit that he wanted a second shot at his vocals on the song called Desperate, which is a ballad that some call one of the era's best. Nice, bluesy, really tasty guitar licks in it. And behind all this, Jack Ponte's fingerprints were everywhere, as he had co-wrote half the album, grinding out marathon pre-production sessions with Davis, sometimes 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, pushing the songs past the point of exhaustion. And the goal was to make every track as undeniable as possible. Just tighten those hooks, make them sharp enough to survive the label's pop-heavy priority. And then there was The Kid Goes Wild. Sam Kinison, wild-eyed and hoarse, dropped in for a mid-song rant that instantly branded the track as something different. When RoboCop 2 rolled around, Orion Pictures grabbed the song for the trailer, the film, and thanks to their own marketing budget, bankrolled a music video that didn't cost the band or the record label a cent. RoboCop crashing a Babylon AD gig, the song blasting in theaters, and suddenly the kids who never set foot in a Bay Area club were snatching up the debut album, all because it caught the track during the credits. And the push from Hollywood and the studio money behind it should have been a ticket to the next level. But all that visibility meant the pressure on Babylon AD was about to reach a new peak. And for one thing, nobody was expecting Babylon AD to take over the charts, but when the numbers came in, the band found themselves sitting on 3 #1 tracks at Metal Radio, the album certified gold, and a spot on the Billboard Top 200 that wouldn't budge for 38 weeks. Peaking at number 46, they carved out a place for themselves that most debut acts could only dream about. And all that momentum twisted the dynamic with the record label overnight. They weren't suddenly this wild experiment. They proved they could actually move units, pull crowds, and justify the label's investment. The labels were getting spun on MTV, and so were the videos. And really, it was the videos that were getting spun on MTV. And the industry took notice. What started as a scramble for relevance turned into a full-on run for the top of the hard rock heap. So for the second album, Babylon AD leveled up. Tom Warman took the hell. The guy with platinum plaques from Poison, Motley Crue, Kix, Cheap Trick, and half the hair bands that ruled the decade. And for Babylon AD, working with Werman was more than a credential. It was a chance to step up to the big leagues, clean up the sound, and chase that kind of commercial hit that the labels were dreaming about. Nothing Sacred didn't miss. Bad Blood, So Savage the Heart both stormed the metal top 10. So Savage the Heart especially landed with real weight, called a monstrous power ballad, a track that hammered the emotional core. Psychedelic Sex Reaction added that nice weird warped twist. Slave Your Body rolled out as a promo signal for the diehards. Take the Dog Off the Chain and Dream Train rounded out the record with that kind of swagger that never really played it safe. The songs from this album would stick around, finding their way onto later live records like Live Lightning. Singles got airplay, shows got bigger, and for a minute it looked like Babylon AD was finally getting the fun that they had fought for. The dream felt real, until the industry turned the tables and the label's priorities would shift overnight. But for the time being, the wheels never stopped turning. Babylon AD hit the road hard after Nothing Sacred dropped. Barely a break between gigs, MTV rotation, another city that looked just like the last, and the Nothing Sacred tour ran like a machine. Lineups with Roxy Blue and Wild Side, stacked bills where every band was swinging for survival in a scene that was about to be blindsided. And every night was just another shot to prove that the hype had not worn off. Videos kept spinning on MTV, keeping their name in front of fans just long enough for the next single or next round of shows. And for a moment, it worked. Babylon AD became a fixture for these diehards, kind of band that packed rooms even as the mainstream started shifting away. But under all the sweat and spotlights, the early 90s brought something that nobody could out-tour or out-promote. A tidal wave was coming for the entire genre, and Babylon AD was about to find out just how fast fortunes could turn. Well, the tidal wave finally hit. Everything broke wide open on that tour bus. The music world was going sideways, Seattle was eating LA alive, and every label executive was on red alert, hunting for the next alternative act that didn't sound anything like the bands they had been promoting a year earlier. The Babylon AD was caught in the crossfire, old enough to be called classic, young enough to still believe they could win this fight. So the brass at the record label set the meeting under the pretense of strategy, but everybody knew what it really meant. The band's manager tried to grease the wheels by pitching an acoustic showcase of So Savage the Heart, in hopes of softening up the suits with something stripped down, emotional, something that could be shopped around as a radio-friendly pivot. Problem was, nobody in Babylon AD wanted to be the next unplugged flavor of the month. They wrestled around with the arrangement, couldn't make it click. Deep down, nobody was itching to play ball with the label's new vision for the group. So when the suits finally climbed aboard this bus, expecting their big, hey, please keep us on the roster moment, Babylon AD didn't even fake enthusiasm. Instead of the acoustic So Savage to the Heart that the manager had pushed, they picked a different song, playing it their own way, a bit louder and wilder, no trace of compromise whatsoever. And the executives, they weren't just disappointed, they were pissed. What was supposed to be this nice peace offering turned into the final straw, a room full of silent stares and barely contained contempt. And that one performance, one song, wrong song, all attitudes sealed their fate. For Arista, it was proof that they had been looking for. The band would not adapt, couldn't be steered, and had no interest in helping the label salvage its investment. By the time those bus doors shut, Babylon AD was already off the roster, pushed out of the big leagues for the one thing that had always set them apart, refusing to play by anybody else's script. And then Babylon AD would get the call that no band wants. They were dropped. But the thing is, Babylon AD had a word for the direction Arista wanted. Wank. They would go on to say that it wasn't about the pop hooks or the slick production. It was about squeezing all the guts out of their sound and swapping it for something easy to play over the PA at the neighborhood grocery store. And their refusal to sell out, unfortunately, didn't come with a round of applause. Just that phone call and the termination letter and a spot on the long list of bands who had chosen stubborn pride over corporate survival. But being off the roster was just the start. Everything the band built, 2 albums, years of touring, a die-hard fan base, was now up against the deadliest opponent in rock, irrelevance. The next wave rolled in. Nobody survived with the hair still standing. By the time the band was pushed off the roster, grunge had bulldozed through every glam, hard rock, and metal act left clinging to the charts, save for a few, of course. Sadly, I've covered so many metal acts on here, and hair metal bands, glam metal bands, and unfortunately, the story always ends up the same. Seattle bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam didn't just change the sound, they rewrote the rule book on what mattered. No more flashy solos, no more party anthems, no more big-haired swagger. And of course, what did the industry do? Well, they pivoted and would turn that into some kind of commodity. And suddenly, the songs that used to fill stadiums were getting boxed up and sent to the clearance rack. Radio started dumping anything with a hint of polish. MTV went for all those plaid shirt monochrome videos. Labels tore up contracts and rerouted all their money to bands who sounded like they're still pissed off about high school. In Babylon AD, they never stood a chance in that climate. They had those arena-sized choruses. And the same edge that got them signed now marked them for extinction. So the silence that followed felt like an obituary. Babylon AD, once charting alongside giants, slipped out the back door in '94, vanished without a breakup announcement or farewell tour, burned by the industry and burned out by the chase. They didn't call it quits, but drifted off into a 5-year freeze. No records or shows. But the break didn't last, and by '98, something cracked. The original lineup resurfaced, minus Rob Reed. Eric Pacheco stepped in on bass, and the band locked in with Apocalypse Records. If the major label world didn't want them, Babylon AD would build something new from the ground up. They hit back with Live in Your Face in '99, a record that proved that they could still draw blood on stage. American Blitzkrieg dropped in 2000, the third studio album that didn't beg for mainstream attention, but scored with fans who had never forgotten what made the band dangerous in the first place. Then in a move that felt both nostalgic and defiant, they dug up the old Persuaders demo tapes for In the Beginning. But even with new records and a second wind, the specter of what the industry had done, what might come next, never really left the room. And so another long silence. But then eventually Babylon AD would storm back in 2014, the Lost Sessions EP in hand, hitting stages across the US and Europe, landing festival slots like they never missed a step. And by 2015, they marked the 25th anniversary. With Live at 25, proof that the old fire hadn't burned out, just smoldered a bit. Then in 2017, a familiar face returned. John Matthews picked up his guitar and the band inked a deal with Frontiers Records, dropping Revelation Highway and hitting the road again. But the years ahead brought as much heartbreak as momentum. In 2020, former bassist Eric Pacheco passed away. The lineup kept shifting, with Craig Peppa and Dylan Soto stepping in for bass and drums. By 2023, just as the band released another live set, Live Lightning, every comeback felt like a dare. One more album, one more run. And in May of 2024, Babylon AD proved they weren't done, dropping their 5th studio record, Rome Wasn't Built in a Day, and hitting the stage with all the grit of a band that refuses to fade quietly. And for a group that weathered every possible industry storm, it wasn't nostalgia driving them anymore. It was unfinished business. And this time nobody was pulling the plug but them. Babylon AD kicked the doors off of every room they played, dragged real rock and roll through every setback, and left their mark in a scene that never really made it easy. The momentum may have gotten stolen somewhere along the way, but the band never let go. Never watered down what made them matter. No label, trend, or lineup shift ever wiped out their sound or their attitude. For every comeback and every reinvention, Babylon AD proved that legacy isn't built on chart positions, it's built on surviving, fighting back, and refusing to disappear. So let that be a lesson to you folks who were planning on setting their guitars down. Nope, you keep those guitars up and keep on going. Make those fingers bleed. To my subscribers, thank you so much. You frigging rock. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to my channel yet, stick on a combat boot and give that subscribe button a nice kick. Then reach around and do the same exact thing with the like button. Join the family. I want to thank you so much for watching.